to ask your burning questions. So best of luck and see you soon.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me on. It is a pleasure. My name's Hussain, and I hopefully will get across my passion for physical activity as a really crucial pillar within lifestyle medicine. But it's so interconnected with the other pillars. I think it's important that we sort of remember that element. Now, a little bit about me. I've come on a bit of a journey, to be honest. If we went back in time 8, 9 years, you'd had a very different Hussein. I was, in fact, diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and high blood pressure back then because I very much struggled both with being sedentary and having I guess what you'd call a developed diet, which was full of ultra-processed foods and full of all the things that, of course, I now know better. But for me, physical activity was that first habit that I was able to unlock, where I went from someone that always struggled to be active throughout all my sort of early years. With sort of the background that I'm from, my parents didn't push me, is probably an understatement. If anything, they discouraged me from being active to focus on academia, and I do absolutely love them, but that didn't put me in good stead, in particular my liver. But what I'm going to hopefully go through in this presentation is the importance of moving specifically to provide us with longevity and how the evidence stacks up for that, and also how we can contribute to supporting our patients to achieve that. So if we start off, physical activity, there is an immense amount of research which evidences it and demonstrates the fact that long-term regular physical activity, it reshapes our body from various organ systems, cardiorespiratory, musculoskeletal, neurological, endocrine, and our immune system. And we often hear the term obesogenic environment, but I think that doesn't quite explore what's actually happening, because in reality, we've got osteosarcopenic obesity. So we've got low bone density, we've got under-muscled population, and we have increased adiposity. And it's this triad that is extremely dangerous when we look at aging, in particular, the quality of those years. I'm going to go into that in more detail, but it's important to bear that in mind when we're looking about how we can improve the population's health, our practice population, or if we're based in the hospital, wherever our patients are, we need to understand those three different areas, and physical activity in its different forms can support each of those. Now, a key message is that as we get older, there is no way of cutting this apart from the fact that you will lose functionality. That happens. Now, to what degree? That you can control. And yes, although dying is inevitable, how we age, that very much has a number of factors that influence it, of which physical activity is one. And the longer we leave it to train our bodies, the less our potential we can reach. And the harder it is, the more work you have to put in to get the same results. Now, I think it's important as a message to patients, we need to let them know that starting at any point is useful. Of course, it's beneficial. Of course, it will move the needle. But I can't lie and say that if you start at the age of 60, you're going to get the same benefits as if you start at the age of 20 or 30. Now, I'm going to come on to this and I'll illustrate this in one of the graphs, but a key principle that we need to be engaging with patients, even ones that aren't yet focused on longevity, but we need to have in the back of our minds and promote it and advocate for it, is building a reserve. Because at the moment, touch wood, getting out of the chair, washing myself, taking my shopping to my car or whatever I'm doing day to day, no matter what I do with my lifestyle, at my age, touch wood, that's a given. I can pretty much do that, touch wood, as long as I don't have any disabilities. But if we want to still do those things when we are 70, 80, 90, then we need to achieve different things at this age for that to be a reality. And I'll come on to that later. And a key part of where I try to encourage patients or the athletes that I work with around getting them prepared to age in a strong way is working on carrying, the different elements of carrying, whether it be on your back, in your hands, grip strength. These things, studies have shown, correlates very strongly with health span. And then the VO2 max. Many of you probably know about this and understand what that means. It's around how our body can utilize oxygen during aerobic respiration. And that's our battery. We know that if we want to be able to have the energy to do the things that we want to do day to day, then we need to have a good enough battery, because like our mobile phones, the battery capacity will slowly die, and it will die quicker if it's not being used. And then strength training. I want to specifically touch on the importance of strength training and how it's not just about preventing falls, which of course is a massive thing and a very important aspect for increased mortality in older years, but because our muscles are important metabolic organs. They store, like the liver, they store glucose as glycogen, and this really does impact how we absorb and metabolize energy. And so it's really important, just as we talked about the osteosarcopenic obesity, we work on the muscles and not neglect that area. Okay, so I mentioned that dying was inevitable, but maybe frailty isn't. And if we look at this first line, this is kind of what's happening, let's say, for the average person in the UK. For many, well, in fact, over the age of 60, 40% will have at least one long-term condition. And the number of patients with more than 4 long-term conditions is increasing. Over the next 10 years, it's anticipated that that proportion will increase by 7% in just 10 years. And what we want to do if we're trying to improve longevity is we don't want to just focus on the life expectancy, we want to focus on health span. And so instead, we don't want this to happen, which is the acquirement of long-term conditions, because we know that, for example, type 2 diabetes is a serious biological ager and will quicken and hasten someone's death. Now, with correct training and regular physical activity, as well as, of course, a number of the other pillars, sleep optimization, nutrition, etc., we can try to achieve this line where life expectancy is still pretty much the same, but the health span is different. And what we mean by health span, that's the number of years with a good quality of life, able to do the things that you want to do, not impaired by health. And if we think, when it comes to functioning there on the vertical axis, there will be different thresholds where if you drop below, you won't be able to achieve it. So it may be carrying the shopping for 5 minutes. So essentially a farmer's carry, if you've ever done that in the gym. There's a certain threshold where once you reach a certain point of functioning, that's going to be a struggle and not possible. With our sort of classical adult, that may come in the sort of early 70s, 60s, as you saw in this graph. This is just arbitrary numbers. It's not sort of specific. But with good training, we can bring that later. It may be that you want to be able to walk at a fair pace, or just getting out of the chair unaided. And we have different functions which require different abilities, and that will hit at certain points. Now, if we're looking at the purple line, the key element there is that we've got that reserve. We are building the buffer early on, where although at that age, we are above the line for any of those day-to-day functionings. Patients won't realize it, but they are well above that threshold. But we need to train yet further if we want to get to 70, 80, 90 and still do those basic things. And one study, which was really interesting, looked over a very long period of time and assessed what 5-kilometer running time would allow people in the 80s to 90s be able to walk unaided at a comfortable pace. And what they found was that for men, it needs to be around 22 to 23 minutes if they were at 30 years old. And for women, about 27, 28 minutes for 5 kilometers. Now, I'm telling you this now, the UK population average is far slower than both of those times. And that is why we are seeing greater degrees of frailty and greater levels of long-term conditions. We need to build this buffer in early, and we need that angle of preventative medicine. This is not a discussion just for our older patients, but in fact, something we should be discussing with all patients. Now, I hope I don't have to go through all the benefits of physical activity, but there are numbers. We've got a 30% reduced risk for all-cause mortality, nearly a third in terms of risk of cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, and stroke, up to 40% for type 2 diabetes for those that are on insulin. We've got, in terms of fractures, for weight-bearing activity, it can be up to 68% reduction in that risk of hip fracture. And then from a mental health perspective, both cognitive and for affective disorders like depression, we see a sustained reduction. So essentially, regular physical activity lowers the risk of several chronic conditions that increase with age, including heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, osteoporosis, certain cancers, as well as cognitive decline. Now, movement also plays to lower anxiety and blood pressure, as well as improve sleep quality. And we know that when we get improved sleep quality, we get a number of beneficial effects beyond that. Now, the physical activity guidelines emphasizes that some activity is better than none. And for the patient in front of us, we need to meet them where they're at. So there's no point explaining that the guidelines are 150 minutes if they're currently not doing anything at all. That's not going to be motivating for them. They need to realize that, in fact, a lot of the benefits come from that first 20 to 30 minutes and engaging with them to achieve that. However, if you're, for example, working more in optimization and you're seeing patients that are looking to really push the boundaries as to what they're doing in their lifestyle to maximize their health, then actually evidence shows that you have to do a fair bit more than just the 150 minutes that's in the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines. And I'll come on to that in a bit. I want to go through a study that was published in 2018 and was work done by both King's College London and the University of Birmingham. Here they looked at 3 groups. One group was our average UK adult, and the age range was between 20 and 35, but they were just randomly selected. The other 2 groups were fit amateur cyclists between the ages of 55 and 80, and then inactive group that were over the age of 55. And they looked at 3 key areas. Now, in terms of muscle mass, what they found in the fit amateur cyclists is that it was maintained compared to the younger group. So they had the muscle bulk of the average 20 to 35-year-old UK adult. And that isn't very much, is an unfortunate caveat, but they had it preserved. The inactive older group had a significant decline, approximately 1.5% per year. In terms of immunity, they looked at fiber size and T cell function. And here, we had comparative results between the young average UK adult and the active older group. But the inactive older group had a significant reduction in all the parameters that they'd assessed. Then for body fat percentage, for body composition, and for cholesterol levels, we saw comparative results between our fit older group, but this was worsened in our inactive older group. So it really does debunk the myth and the assumption that aging automatically makes us frailer. You know, we don't stop moving because we get old. We get old because we stop moving. Yes, we may need to adapt those movements. And yes, I doubt I'm going to be able to achieve the times that I can do now when I'm 70, 80. But that's not the point. The point is that we still move and we find a way to move. And a good friend of mine and mentor is Samuel Gray. And if you've ever had the privilege of hearing him speak, he says that as each decade goes by, you have to do more movement. It may not be faster or longer, but it's more in terms of effort. He's now in his late 70s and he is going strong. He still wears these brilliant red Nike trainers in any presentation he does. I try to emulate him by wearing them as well. But the message is that you need to keep doing more and keep working on it in a way that suits you. Now, the greatest benefit has been found in physical activities that have a certain cocktail. And I've got a few different options here. And I'll be really interested if you just pop it in the chat as to which activity, if it was just done in isolation, which ones you think produces the best results in terms of health span, so that longest period of quality of life? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Pop it in the chat. And the options we've got some swimming, we've got strength training there, we've got endurance activities like running and cycling, we've got dancing, which is what that sort of stick man is doing with the music, and we've got racket sports. What do we think? Now, I think really the important message is that all those movements are great, and like we don't want to do. It's not about one is better than others, and we'll come on to the fact that actually maybe we need to be doing multiple different movements. But when we looked at it specifically here, we found that dancing had fantastic results, and you can understand why. You're doing balance. Cognitively, you're engaged because you're having to learn new moves. Socially, it's great. You're meeting up with friends, you're meeting up with a community, listening to incredible music, hopefully. And you've also got elements like coordination and flexibility and strength. It's just a great all-round movement. And I think it's just basically to open the message that it doesn't have to always be in the gym. It doesn't have to be running on a treadmill or outside. We need to listen to our patients and find out what is it that makes them tick, and open their eyes that work in the allotment, going for a dance, and just engineering a little bit of movement into their day, taking the stairs rather than the lift. Whatever it may be, just finding it to get in, because that's what's important. Often perfectionism can be the real barrier to actual achievement. So I know I mentioned that dancing is great and that's a fantastic, probably all-round movement, but I'm now going to change the tactic and explain that one is unlikely to be enough if we want optimal longevity. Okay. Now, it has an incredible power, physical activity, to really enable us to live a good quality of life and delay the onset of these diseases. And so when we think about what activities we can do, we need to work different muscle groups. This is rucking. I don't know if anyone's ever tried rucking before, but I'd highly recommend it. In particular, for your patients where weight bearing may be more difficult, so they've decided to cut down their running, which is fair enough. If they've got bone on bone osteoarthritis, running, and particularly if they've got extra weight, it's probably not ideal. 8 times the force through the joints. Now, for mild osteoarthritis, we know weight bearing is actually very good through the sort of tear, flare, repair cycle. However, for those that want to cut down on their running, but they still want to be working themselves into a greater extent than walking does, rucking's brilliant. It's basically a weighted vest with clips around the chest and the lower waist. And if you've never tried it before, I promise you, it is extremely knackering. The sweat that builds up between your back and the rucksack is, so immense you probably could fill up an entire water bottle. At least that is for me. And then we think about things that work grip strength. That could be either things like farmer's carry or even just general movements in the gym where you're holding weights and you're holding into position. That will work that. And there's really clear evidence that grip strength correlates with health span. And then, yes, we do want endurance activities. Maybe it's in the form of running, maybe it's cycling, maybe it's swimming, but it's about that VO2 max, building that battery so then it doesn't run out before the day is up. Strength training. Strength training is your armor against disease. From muscle bulk protecting you from a metabolic perspective, to muscles protecting your joints from diseases like osteoarthritis, to providing you with the base and the chassis to enable you to live longer in a way that you want to do. Strength training is really, really paramount. And when we think about strength training, fueling that is really important. And I know that I'm on a talk here with plant-based professionals. So you guys know that the power of what plants can bring for your diet nutritionally. But we do need to bear in mind that if we are thinking of maximal muscle synthesis, that we do need to balance up and be intelligent in how we utilize those proteins. Now, I fully suspect you guys already all know this, but when I'm thinking of our 9 essential amino acids, there are certain plant-based foods that are better than others. And we have complete proteins. So these are sources where they contain all 9 essential amino acids, in particular leucine, methionine, and lysine, which are really good for muscle development. Things like tofu, things like buckwheat and quinoa, these complete proteins are very good. Now, they do still are relatively low in those key amino acids. And we think of leucine, really important for muscle development. there are other ways that you can support a plant-based diet to achieve that. And that is one, just increasing the total protein, because still when we do look at studies, total protein intake is lower. However, we do need to balance that against the fact that a lot of the sort of recent headlines and news around protein, some of that probably isn't justified, given that already the average UK adult consumes somewhere in the region of 1.5 to 1.6 grams per kilo. And so that is pretty much where most people would state your target should be. And the International Society of Sport and Exercise Medicine's position statement on that was around that figure, and it went up to 3 grams, which was extremely high per kilo, only for those that were extremely active and deemed as athletes. But mixing your plant-based proteins is very useful to try and get an array of the different essential amino acids. And they suggested in their protein statement to increase the daily consumption by 10 grams to try to achieve comparative results to what you'd see in, for example, animal-based protein. So it's something to bear in mind. And you can 100% definitely achieve that with a plant-based diet. Other physical activity things to consider is coordination. Things like archery or racket sports are brilliant at that. And then we need to think about how do we specifically bespoke our movements to activities that we want to do. So if getting out of the chair is important to you, which I suspect it is for most of us, then working on movements in the gym that will enable that. So that may be working on a squat or a half squat there. For carrying your shopping to your car, that'll be doing a farmer's carry. If you're lifting something off the ground, that'll be stuff like deadlifts. Now, at the age of 20, 30, 40, we need to train it to a much higher degree if we want that curve to still remain above the threshold, if that makes sense. Because I know you can do all those activities now anyway, and your patient will be able to, when they're younger, touch wood, do that anyway. But we need to build that buffer if we want to get to our older years and still be able to do it. And generally, I want to try and sell the notion of removing exercise as a term we use, because that's often associated with punishment, with trying to correct overindulgences in food and people looking at the clock as it barely moves as they're on the treadmill. And instead bring in physical activity or the word movement, because it is a joyful way to experience life. And for me, it's really helped from my mental health in particular, because previous to 8, 9 years, I wouldn't even run for the bus, if I'm being honest. Well, I couldn't even run for the bus. And so now having it as an outlet for me to get confident, to release some anxieties, to work on myself in a way, it can be really, really beneficial and structure. And it's about inspiring your patient to do that, not in the way that you think is best, but in a way that they understand and the way that they want to work with. So we do need to bear that in mind. Now, there are barriers, and it's wrong to anticipate that there aren't. And I think what's really interesting is that when we're thinking about what patients decide and feel are the barriers, it can often be different to what we perceive. And We're Undefeatable, which is a campaign led by the Richmond Group of Charities, published the research last week, and it explored the healthcare professionals' perception on what were the barriers for patients to get active. And then they asked the patients what their barriers were to get active. And there was a gap. And they've termed it the empathy gap, which is quite harsh, but I think in many ways is true. And I'm pretty sure I've fallen in that trap a number of times. Well, the healthcare professionals put number one, motivation, and number two, financial restriction as the two main barriers for patients, while the patients put fatigue and pain. And I think that's really important that we understand that, because I don't know what it's like to live with those kind of long-term conditions. Luckily, the two that I had, blood pressure and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, they're asymptomatic. So it's important that we try to get the patient to explain to us what those are, rather than assume. And there's a lot of negative messaging out there. What it looks to seem to be active on social media and in the news, it's not in a way that they can relate with. And so they don't feel like the sort of physical activity material. That's a massive shame, because everyone is. Now, motivation can be a really important thing to ask with your patient is a key component in behavior change. And although you can't rely on motivation, and we shouldn't rely on motivation, it is important that we discuss this with patients and find out what it is that helps them to get motivated, because they do need that spark before the discipline and routine kicks in. And we need to engage with those troublesome symptoms and acknowledge them and appreciate that they are going to be barriers to the patients. Only through acknowledging them and working with the patient, not always to fix them, because many of the times we can't fix them, but even just showing the effort that we're trying to maximize our treatment for those symptoms to enable them to get active, and doing it with that frame in mind. So, for example, when I inject patients with a steroid injection, it's after a long process of motivational interviewing to work them up towards strength training. And instead, the injection is used as part of that journey, but they fully understand that that's part of, not the solution. And body image is a really important thing to bear in mind, because it can stop people going to gyms. It can stop people joining clubs. And we need to change and transform how we present physical activity and those being physical activity so that more people in our society can identify with. And the key solution is we need them to realize that moving are all these things. And with that in mind, before I finish the presentation, I want us to also move. So I'm not a hypocrite. Okay, so for 30 seconds, I want us to do some squats from stand to chair. Okay, so I can't quite see you, so I have to believe that you are also doing this with me, and then I'm not looking like a wally on my own. But doing little things like this, just breaking up your clinic, can be really helpful. And in fact, we are Undefeatable have released a sort of 5 in 5 minutes, where they're trying to encourage healthcare professionals to do 5 movements, really simple ones. They can just help. Trust me, that can break up a clinic, and it can change your mood, especially when you're duty doctor. And there's sort of 3 principles that I generally use for the lifestyle service that we run at the Leamington Primary Care Network, which is an NHS service. And that is engagement. This is where you get patients to help you design what you're delivering. Education. And that's not educating the patient, because in many ways we don't need to educate. We need to facilitate and support them on that change. But that's education of staff. We need more NHS staff understanding the importance of lifestyle medicine and how it can be a rewarding way for the patient to take charge and take agency of their health. Then here's evolution. Since we launched the service in 2019, 2020, it has changed rapidly. That's what we need. If we are going to meet the demands of our patients, we need to be able to evolve and utilize knowledge base from across the professions. I'm very grateful in my team. I've got an incredible health and wellbeing coach who I think is a member of the plant-based health professionals, Joe Fleming. I've got 2 dietitians, 3 social prescribers, and together we utilize our skills and our experience to benefit the patients as best we can. And if you're asking kind of why else, well, because it's fun. It's a great way to form connections with people, moving and talking, and it's a great way to embed people into the community. Sometimes I'll ask patients that I've identified as being lonely and struggling with their mental health, and I'll utilize physical activity not for the physical or the direct mental health benefits, but because it's a way to meet other people. Walking groups are great ways to socialize. So really do think about how you can use physical activity in more than just the physiological sense. And I just want to show you this one video of a patient that I met. It was about 3-4 months after the COVID pandemic came through. But it's Darren, and every day he inspires me, and he always sends me little updates and photos of the activities that he's doing. But I'll show you this quick video.
When I first met Darren, he was struggling to keep at even a gentle pace. He was getting quite breathless. That was a combination of course, his baseline fitness, but also the fact that he was recently out of hospital suffering with a respiratory infection with COVID.
At the end of February 21, I ended up in intensive care for 45 days, put me in an induced coma for 15 days, and then following discharge, I had 2 readmissions from various infections. Immediately in post-recovery, I had real problems with my leg function. I also had breathing issues. I was very short of breath. And then to try and address that, I started swimming.
Being able to see Darren swim in the flesh, it's not something that most healthcare professionals will ever get the privilege of doing, because as he continued to swim, you could see visibly how different he was. He was fitter, he looked younger, he looked stronger, and also more confident as well. Encouraging them and supporting them on that journey can be far more powerful than a number of the other interventions that we do.
And yeah, Darren is an absolute legend, if I'm being honest. And when he first came to the group, I remember when I mentioned it in the consultation, after he'd been discharged from ITU for a few weeks and he was slowly making amends, but really in a difficult way, he said that he wanted to become more active. And the message I want to get across to you is that, ashamedly, when he mentioned that, I didn't think he really meant it. I thought that this was just sort of a knee-jerk reaction to being told that you're probably going to die when he was in ITU and his family came to visit. But when it came to the next week, and we do our weekly free physical activity sessions, we do sort of walks and swims and runs. But he came to the walk, and he was there, and he showed up, and I was like, oh, okay, fair enough, this is brilliant. And he kept coming back. And what I later found out is that even when he went to work in Leeds, which was 2.5 hours away, he would drive 2.5 hours to come to our evening walk, and then 2.5 hours back, just because he'd realized how important it was for his health. He didn't want to break up the habit, and he was gaining so much from being around other people and being within that community. That's just how important it was that he was doing that. Now, I hope you found that talk helpful. And the summary of really what I want to say is that we need to access all the positive things in our life. And for me, physical activity was that key that allowed me to achieve that. Prior to that, I really struggled, and I was in a massive hole when it comes to my mental health and sort of stress and feeling just burnt out with everything. I just didn't feel like the practice that I was doing 8-9 years ago was aligned to my values. But through movement, it's inspired me to understand so many of the other aspects of lifestyle medicine better, understand myself better, and I just hope that I can translate that for more patients. I hope that's been useful, and some useful information for you guys to take forward is there's a few useful tips. So the Movement Prescription podcast is a podcast that I co-host with 2 other incredible lifestyle GPs. It's a BSLM, British Society of Lifestyle Medicine podcast that you can access on all platforms. And a good one to advise, if you haven't watched it yourself, but definitely advise patients to go have a look at, is the series Limitless, which is on Disney Plus. It's a really good way. It breaks down the key areas of longevity medicine, and it's hosted by Dr. Peter Attia, and it's in fact his book in the top right there, Outlive. That I'd highly recommend giving a read. It really does break down a lot of the science in this. And then for those of you that are keen lifestyle medics or prospective lifestyle medics, then I co-authored with 3 of my colleagues the lifestyle medicine framework for an extended role, for a GP with an extended role in lifestyle medicine. I'd highly recommend having a look at the Ask GP website to see how that is. It outlines what training you require, what experience, what scope of practice you can work in. So I'd highly recommend you giving that a read. And if you do want further training, then there's new courses out there, whether it be the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine diploma. There's also the Redwell Lifestyle Medicine course, which will be launching in June. So I'd highly recommend having a look if you want to delve deeper into this topic. But either way, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and yeah, happy to review questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It was absolutely incredible. I feel like there was something there for everyone, whether or not you're already physically active and want to pick certain things up, or you're starting at kind of as a beginner. So we've got lots of questions already, and some that have been sent to me privately as well. So anyone who wants to do that can also send them to me. So I thought I'd kick off and just ask you. You mentioned that you came from this journey of having ill health. You had a diagnosis of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which now affects 1 in 4 globally, and as many as 1 in 3 in places like India. How did you start your movement journey and kind of getting active really yourself? Had you been active as a child, and was that then something you'd enjoyed, or was it quite new to you?
So no, I hadn't been active at any point before that diagnosis. In fact, I went to play football after school for just half an hour at primary school with my friends. I hadn't really played before. And when my mum came to pick me up, she told me off. She was like, "What are you doing? Like, you either are revising, eating, or sleeping." That was kind of the rules in our household. And physical activity was just discouraged in every way, shape, or form. Like, it was something that my dad liked to watch on TV, but never want his kid to do. I remember asking him sometimes, because he used to love football. My dad's a massive football fan. I go, "Oh, what would you do if I was one day a football player? Let's say for your favorite team." He goes, "I would probably kill you." And I think he generally probably meant it. So I had no idea how to be active throughout any of my sort of younger years and for university. And I had tried it in uni. I had tried to, in particular, go to the gym. I think it's a common thing amongst young men. When you go to uni, you suddenly realize that you want to get a little bit bigger. But after about 2, 3 weeks, I would always give up. Every time I would give up. And the final thing that cracked it, yes, definitely getting the diagnosis and realizing that I need to do something for my health. Although interestingly, when I spoke with my GP and we discussed my high blood pressure and NAFLD, he just said that it's genetic and that, like my dad does also have both those conditions as well as a number of my uncles, and that this is just how it is. And it is true in the sense that, unfortunately, those from a South Asian background will have a higher risk of cardiometabolic disease at comparative BMIs. There was a really interesting study in the Lancet, which to have the comparative risk for type 2 diabetes with someone from a white family background at a BMI of 30, for someone from a South Asian background, it's just 23.9. So it made me realize that, yes, my BMI was about the 29 region. And although, yes, I understand that's overweight, but I didn't feel like I was at an obesity level which would reflect the conditions that I had got. And now I understand that a bit better genetically. But even so, like what sort of cracked it from my movement perspective was parkrun. And that's in fact why I now work there. The practice that I work at joined the Parkrun Practice Initiative. And so they did a sort of a session at lunchtime with the whole surgery there. And I'd never heard of parkrun before. And so I went, I watched, and the practice manager said, "Hussain, you should really come." He knew that I was trying to improve my health. And he goes, "Do you know what? You should come, give it a try, see what you like." And I went to parkrun. And the first 400 meters, I was amazing. I was like, this running stuff's easy peasy. The next 4,600 meters was absolute agony. Like I've never found anything more difficult in my life. I got overtaken with someone with 2 kids in a pram. I got overtaken by a guy in his 70s. And I think that was the wake-up call that I needed to realize just how unfit I was. And over that time, just slowly working on it, like slowly just doing a little bit more each week, a little bit more, a little bit more. I think one of the key things that I learned early on in my journey and what enabled me to get active, eat better, sleep better, was the process of doing things well in a small way. Stop trying to be ambitious. Go, okay, that's it. I'm gonna, eat a perfect diet now. Oh, I'm gonna now, be able to run marathons and do that kind of stuff. I was always trying to do an all or nothing approach before. As soon as I realized that just do a tiny thing, do it really well, and then do another tiny thing, and then do another tiny thing. And then eventually I got to a point where now, like my 5K time, I think I've cut it down by more than half. And I can't even remember what it was like before sort of physical activity, if that makes sense. But yeah, parkrun, have a massive thanks to them. And also to my wife, who persuaded me to go, because when I got home, I was kind of like, "Oh, I don't want to go to parkrun. I'll feel out of place." I didn't even have any trainers. But my wife dragged me along. And so I highly appreciate her thanks.
So important to have people in your corner who motivate you. And you mentioned there just the higher risk among certain groups, particularly certain ethnic groups, for cardiometabolic disease. But we know that South Asian women are the most sedentary in the UK. And this is a huge issue. And obviously, these groups face a lot of different issues, whether it's working multiple jobs or having different pressures, or suddenly more increased pressures. What can be done to help people who are in certain communities where exercise is seen as you mentioned, just like your dad, like not something to really pursue, or movement is not seen as something that is worthwhile? You should be studying, you should be working. This is just not something people do. How can we encourage people to do that from those communities?
Yeah, no, really important point. I'm really lucky in my team at the Leamington Primary Care Network. We have one of the most incredible individual, Sneh, who is a Gujarati and in her sort of mid-60s, I hope she doesn't mind me saying, and an incredible advocate for movement. She is walking, swimming, and she leads a number of our sessions. In fact, she's our walk leader in our group, and she leads the swim session that we do on a Monday evening. And having someone there that is from that background, because Leamington does have a very high South Asian population, in particular Punjabi, but having someone there that they can relate with and that they can connect with makes a massive difference. And I think so the first thing we got to do is make sure that they have relatable role models that they can see, because there's no point, even myself, different age group, different gender, I'm not relatable to them. And so that's an important aspect. Another is the kind of physical activity offerings that we need to have in our community. It needs to be guided based from the different communities. So, for example, our swim group, which is a mixed gender, I don't think I've ever seen one South Asian lady patient come to our swim group. That's just the way it is. I don't think they'll feel comfortable, and there'll be a number of reasons for that. However, through collaboration and connection with them, in the local community, they've started Bhangra Fit, which is where they use Bhangra music, but they adapt it to incorporate strength training, flexibility, and movement. And that has got them all going, and they love to go. And it's a different kind of thing. They don't think they're going to an exercise class. They just think they're going to a dance class. And in reality, and I've done the Bhangra Fit session with them, and trust me, it's a great workout.
Totally. I think
100%.
temples and community centres and religious groups and things like organising community-led workouts and fitness classes is definitely one of the great ways forward. So we've got so many questions. Let's try and do a quick fire and try and get through as many.
Let's do it.
So can you remind me of the 5K time that we should achieve, 5 kilometre time that we should achieve at age 30 that will enable us to walk well when we're age 80?
Yeah. So for women, it was 28 minutes, approximately. It's 28 something. I don't know the exact number. And for men, it was somewhere between 21 to 21 minutes for a 5 kilometers. So that's a good time for both genders there. And just illustrates, like, if you want to achieve that at the age of 80, you need to have a big buffer.
Yeah, I think that point really came across in this. It's really, really important. You've got to start preparing for those older years. That health span is
100%.
start early. Are there any exercises that you can recommend for reducing inflammation and pain?
Okay, so I'm assuming when we're talking about inflammation, are we talking general inflammation or within the joint? That's kind of the question. I'll try and sort of cover both. So in terms of osteoarthritis, because that's a common reason that people will feel discomfort in the joints and get inflammation. NICE updated the guidance last year because the use of the term wear and tear doesn't accurately reflect what's going on. If we want to actually improve the conditioning and reduce the inflammation within that joint, we need to strengthen the muscles around the joint. That's going to improve the joint space and improve the support. But also because they've come up with this sort of triad, which is called tear, flare, and repair. Because if you create enough tear that you get an inflammation occur, that promotes repair within the joint. And then if you get that balance right, where you're getting enough tear where it's not overloading the system with inflammation, but creating enough of those signaling molecules to promote repair, then you see consistent change with improving function. So with our osteoarthritic patients, it's really important that they get that stepwise approach, that they understand and they maintain a certain pain threshold. I often use a sort of 3 to 4 out of 10 kind of level. I say, look, if your pain's going up to 3, 4 out of 10 while you're being active, then continue and try and hold it there. If it goes above that, I want you to just slow it down a little bit. If it goes below that, look to increase it yet further. And it's about that process. Strength training combined with the weight-bearing activity, which creates the flare, then you can achieve those results long term. In terms of generalized inflammation, most physical activity has been shown to reduce it. Probably endurance aerobic activity at a lower zone is probably going to be the most effective way of doing that. But all physical activity has been shown to overall reduce inflammation.
Great answer. Yeah, I think you're mixing it up with low intensity things along with the higher intensity things is
And
probably
creating the rest, because that's another thing. If you have too much physical activity without the required rest in between, then you're not going to allow the body to actually improve that. And so you can build up inflammation, in fact, build up fatigue. So rest is really important. That stress, recover, repeat process is really important. And the periods of rest that each person needs depends on their fitness. If they're quite early on in the journey, they'll need much longer periods of rest after an activity. While as you become fitter and stronger, you find that you need shorter periods.
That's so true. And obviously the role of diet and sleep as well being really important. We have lots of tips on plant-based nutrition and things on our website for anyone who's interested. Where would you put Tai Chi and is it Qigong? Qigong? I would say that wrong, on the scale of being beneficial. So Tai Chi and Qigong, how would you rate those activities?
I'd rate them highly, and that's specifically around proprioception, really good in terms of understanding the body movements, being connected to the movements. We know that that's a big reason why many older people start to become frailer and less confident with their movement, because outside of even increasing their risk of falls, as soon as they become less confident with their movement, they do less of it. That's pretty obvious. When they do less of it, the deconditioning accelerates. And so the aging process accelerates. So no, things like that can be really beneficial to ensure that they have that control over their movements, as well as Tai Chi is exceptionally good for, fatigability of those muscles. If you've ever done it before, you'll realize that it is very tiring and you will work those muscles, and that trying to improve muscle fatigability is really important because it's not just about maximal strength that you can do. It's about how long your muscles can operate before they reach voluntary failure and that fatigability.
Fantastic. And what is your opinion on protein powders to increase muscle mass for older individuals in conjunction with exercise?
Yeah, it's a really important question. Like for sure, our older patients, we do need to be advocating for more protein intake in total. Now, okay, like it depends. I would generally only use protein powder if I'm adding it to a meal that is generally protein deficient and I'm using it for another thing. So for example, in the morning, I'll have porridge and I'll add protein powder to that. And I'd encourage, for example, to use that. However, I do feel that it is very much able to obtain it through your diet. Now, different people will be less able to achieve that for whatever reason, whether that be financial or sort of the cooking preferences, etc. But you can get more than enough protein through a whole-based diet and including a plant-based diet. But I think it is important that when we're looking at plant-based, that we do incorporate more protein total than you would if you were having an omnivorous diet, and to consider which proteins you're using, because as I said before, those amino acids, they're not all equal in terms of how important they are for muscle synthesis. So, those complete protein options, as well as diversifying the different plant proteins, even in the same meal, can be very useful. But I would generally advocate, so first of all, try and get it from your diet. If the patient's really struggling to achieve that, then yes, protein powder can be helpful, but as a first port of call, as an addition to a relatively protein deficient meal, not as a replacement. Because what I sometimes see now is people using it as meals, and yes, you're going to get lots of protein, but where are all the other nutrients coming from? Where are all the other important nutrients which are also needed, even just for muscle development, let alone for health in general? And that's why I worry that protein powder may not achieve it if it's used too liberally.
I totally agree with everything you said. Our bodies do cycle through amino acids on a 48-hour basis. So just including a variety of foods in your diet is important. And I think that for older adults, then you making the use of things like legume-based pastas, like you get chickpea pasta, things like soya chunks or TVP. Don't be afraid of some lightly processed foods. Obviously, tofu and tempeh have incredibly bioavailable sources of protein. So I do think they're very important to include. And I think that having, just 3 meals, aiming for at least 20 grams of protein per meal, maybe a snack. And that's really important, especially if you're resistance training or you're trying to lose weight and you don't want to be losing that lean muscle mass, which is so hard to put on when you get older. So I think that's, I'm totally with you on that.
Absolutely. And as you said, like spreading it out across the day rather than going for these massive loads, apart from maybe a little bit more in the morning, it has been shown to be relatively beneficial. Generally, you want to spread it out across the day.
Totally. And I think making smart swaps. So if you're swapping almond milk for soya milk, which has about 6 grams of protein per cup, or just making those swaps can make a big difference. Instead of having just rice, then switch to quinoa or buckwheat.
Yeah, buckwheat. Yeah, 100%.
Really good difference. So there's a question here that was more specific. What is the evidence on the best physical activity for those with COPD where lung capacity is compromised?
Very good. Yes. So like there's 2 main issues that occur in COPD in terms of the cardiorespiratory fitness and strength. Like you actually get you get sarcopenia quite severely with COPD because of the limitation of the BREF and the sort of energy levels. They become very sarcopenic, and that accelerates the issue. So it's important that we incorporate some realistic strength training. Now, when I say strength training, I'm not talking about always, going to the gym. It can really simply be certain movements that we get them to do at home or do with sort of household objects. So strength training is important, in particular the back, because we want to improve posture. We know that posture will relate to the ability to take good quality breaths, but we need to work on the aerobic fitness. And again, how that's done is through guiding it based on their ability. And pulmonary rehab is a really fantastic place to send them. They work on these factors, and evidence shows that through pulmonary rehabilitation, if we can actually get them to attend, because it has a very high DNA rate, the benefits they get last for 12 months. So a 12-week program can last for 12 months in terms of beneficial effects. And if your patient's already been to pulmonary rehab and have found it useful, NICE now tell us that we can send them again. It's not like a one-time only deal. So do think about if you want to get your patients to actually get that benefit, pulmonary rehab, because they will touch on physical activity and those 2 key factors a lot with them. They have physios within the team, and most, at least if it's like like my one, then they do a fantastic job.
Super helpful, thanks. I'm just going to launch a quick poll and just to get everyone's feedback. But I have one last question, and it's how do you view intermittent fasting when someone's on a plant-based diet, or if they're not? What's your views on fasting for people who are trying to get fit?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So intermittent fasting has become very popular, hasn't it, the last few years? And it's got pros and cons. Definitely, there's good evidence growing for those with metabolic conditions, in particular type 2 diabetes. We see some improved outcomes, even in complication rates in terms of diabetic retinopathy, insulin resistance, etc. But for those that are kind of on the higher end of the activity spectrum, for example, in none of the athletes that I train or any of the team that works at British Triathlon, we would never advocate for intermittent fasting. There isn't much good evidence that it improves your activity levels. Yes, sometimes we would do fasted activities, like, for example, we would do a run or a cycle in the morning, but it'll always be less than an hour and a half, and that would be fasted, just essentially the overnight fast. But then you would look to consume within the next 30, 60 minutes. So for your highly active individual, I don't think so. Like there's too much evidence that you drop muscle mass in total, in particular with the severe fasts. If you're looking beyond sort of ratios, looking at sometimes you'll see some even like 321 and you'll see 519, and so that can be way too severe in those instances. So I would say for your metabolic unhealthy patient, and that's the only way that they feel like they can try to manage their steps, then fine. I think there's good evidence there. But for your highly active, no, I don't think so. Like, I don't think that you definitely won't be gaining anything. You may not be causing much harm, but I don't see that there's much evidence to say that you'll gain.
I agree. And I think that it's really about looking at the individuals. We know that, for example, for women in particular, that we really ideally don't want to be doing fasted workouts in the morning. It can really negatively impact us, and especially at certain times of the cycle. So making sure that you are having fueled, fed workouts. So even having something small like a banana and a handful of nuts, or a crumpet with peanut butter is really helpful and can actually help you perform better and smash those targets and goals. So
100%.
I think everyone feels different, and I totally appreciate this is quite a nuanced sort of thing. But I think if you don't feel great when you're fasting, then don't feel that you have to do that to get the benefits of exercise or anything like that. I don't think there's enough concrete research to show that everyone should be doing that for improved long-term health outcomes. The most important thing is what we put on our plate, how we move our bodies, and all of those other lifestyle pillars. And fasting isn't a license to eat whatever you want that way. So
Definitely not.
yeah,
Definitely.
and I think that, so hopefully if you have more questions about that, Shireen Kassam, who's the founder of Plant-Based Health Professionals, she's done a few articles about that on our website for anyone who's interested, as well as there's lots of information for older adults and around nutrition. And we're just launching a new protein fact sheet very shortly as well. It's going to go up in the next 2 weeks. So do check out our resources. And most importantly, Hussain, how can everyone keep in touch with your work? Obviously, I follow you on Instagram, where I can see that you're active every single day. That kind of inspires me. But where can people find you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, the handle is at Iron Doctor Haz, Haz. Please also reach out if you're a healthcare professional and you're sort of either doing other things, physical activity or lifestyle medicine in general. I love to hear what you're doing, mainly because we like to shout about it at the Royal College. We release a newsletter. We like to keep the kind of community updated and inspire others. So, for example, if you're doing something cool in your practice or your work, we'd love to hear about it. So I think that's my favorite part of the job, where people send their sort of what they're doing in, and it makes me feel very positive for the future, that we've got more and more healthcare professionals aligned with lifestyle medicine, wanting to use things like nutrition and movement and sleep and healthy relationships to better our patients. And on LinkedIn as well, which is just my name. If you just search Dr. Hussain Al-Zubaidi, I'm on there as well. So, but thank you again for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Yeah, I just popped your Instagram handle down below, but we definitely will be sharing we've got some amazing members doing some really cool things in terms of the world of physical activity. So I think that's really cool. We know that doctors who are active themselves are much more likely to inform their patients about the benefits of physical activity as well. So
A
be the
million miles. And it's all more authentic as well. It's more authentic when you're genuinely doing it. The patient can tell that it means more, if that makes sense. But yeah, please do. And like, if there's ever anything that you guys are doing in your community that you want us at the RCGP Lifestyle to support and to shout about, that's what we're here for. So I'll be very glad.
Everyone is in awe, and they're saying such a compassionate and motivating talk, really excellent. They all learned a lot. So thanks everyone. And for the recording of this, it's going to go up in the Plant-Based Health Professionals members area in a few days' time, and you will all get information on CPD in a few days as well. So thanks a lot, everyone, and good night. Thanks, Hussain.
Thank you.